Hi everybody, it's Elizabeth Willetts here from Investing in Women. Happy Tuesday. I hope the sun is shining where you are today. We are live today on Facebook and on LinkedIn, and I'm joined by Violet Black from Mother's Rock, and we're going to be talking today all about how to discover your inner champion and how to become your own career best friend. So as people are logging on, you can let us know so you can hear us all okay. If you've got any problems with sound, just drop us a comment. You can obviously ask questions all through the session. I know Violet has so much wisdom to share with us today, but as people are logging on, thank you so much for watching us. I'm live today on Facebook and on LinkedIn with Violet Black from Mother's Rock, and we're going to be talking all about how to discover your own inner champion and become your career best friend. So thank you so much, Violet, for joining us today. I'm so excited about this session. I think it's going to be absolutely fabulous, and really excited to learn a little bit more about you as well and what prompted you to set up Mother's Rock. So yes, before we go into the session, it'd be a good opportunity for you to just introduce yourself and explain what Mother's Rock do.
Lovely. Well, it's really great to be here. And I'm Violet Black. And yes, I'm the founder of Mother's Rock. Mother's Rock is totally my baby, my passion project. It was born pretty much at the same time as my children. Yeah. I found having kids really hard. I just felt like all this amazing magic that I was experiencing was not recognised, and the work that goes into it was not recognised. And because I was on maternity leave, I almost felt like I was this parasite on society because I was not contributing financially. It was like, well, what are you doing with your time? I had postnatal depression. I really struggled with that side. And then when I went back to work, I had this whole life experience, all these things that I'd learned that I felt like I had to just put in a box and pretend it happened. And I had to just move in and just pretend I didn't have kids, put on this fake front. And then I had to try and kind of squeeze my family life into my work life. And I just felt like it didn't work for me. It didn't work for my kids, but also didn't work for work because I wasn't showing up as myself fully. I was pretending to be someone I wasn't, basically someone without kids. And the more I kind of reflected on my own experiences, the more I spoke to it, so many people that talk about it, I realized so many of us mothers, but also fathers increasingly who want to be more involved, are really beginning to feel like this real disconnect between this experience of raising our children and what it brings us and who we're becoming, and then wanting to bring that to the workplace, but just not being able to. So lots of mothers, we either get faced with the choice of going back to work, having to work full time with a really pressured job and having the guilt of work, because work is never ending anyway, and the guilt of home. Or we decide, okay, well, I'm going to opt out of work entirely and be a stay-at-home mum, which is, I've done both of those options. It's really stressful, and it can lead to alienation, low self-esteem, there's loads of issues. Or we may end up finding a job that's much below our experience and pay grade to be part-time, which again leads to low self-esteem and can also lead to low mode frustration, which kind of impacts in both worlds. So I feel like we're basically getting a rough deal, which is why I love what you're doing. So Mother's Rock's really that.
I'm just like nodding because I am seriously like, I agree with you. And every feeling you describe, I'm like, I have felt every one of those feelings. Yeah, you've literally like put my thoughts into it. I'm sure people are watching this.
Like, am I feeling this on my own? So it's almost like clear to be like, there is someone out there. And then the more I realized, there's loads of people who are doing this work, but I didn't know any of that. I was like, I need to do something to support mothers. Like, what can we start doing? And so Mother's Rock really just came from wanting to do that. And I wasn't even a coach yet. I hadn't trained to be a coach. I just had this idea of like, I need to champion mothers.
So what were you doing before for people that watch that?
So my passion has always been transformation with people. And I used to work in the heritage sector. So managing large educational programs, doing a lot of work with community groups, with schools. So that's really my kind of core of what I do. And I guess the like golden thread running through my work is that like transforming lives, but now I do it more on a one-to-one basis. And often actually this is the talk I'll go through a lot, that the desire to the Mother's Rock is my bigger. So whenever I feel doubt or anything, it's that belief of kind of what I'm doing and almost why I'm doing it. Like, it's not really about me having a really great job. It's a lovely job, but it's really about why I'm doing this and kind of who I stand for. And I'll come back to that a lot, but just as a bit of a spoiler, you know, having something that you stand for and that you believe in that can get you out of the way will help you overcome those moments when you're like, oh, I really don't want to send that email or put myself out there because it's scary.
Yeah. So Mothers Rock. So you are a coaching business, and do you help predominantly mothers, or?
Yeah, so there's two bits to what I do. So I'm a coach, also a leadership coach, and I work with leaders across various fields on innovation and authentic leadership. And then there's like my baby, which is Mothers Rock, and that's very much around inner leadership and career development for mothers predominantly. But again, I do see fathers as well, and it's very much a lot of the work. People come to me because they want a flexible job, they want to change career. The majority of the work that I end up doing is around self-worth and self-belief.
Yeah, I think it's right what you said about, I've forgotten whether we said this before we went live, about society and how society is set up to make us feel small. And I think that is that's obviously a huge problem, and that is a big reason why a lot of women, when they become mothers, lose their confidence, because of how society views women, tells mothers how they should behave, etc. I think if society did a better job of bigging mothers up, telling them what an amazing, you know, thing they were doing, how all the different skills they were learning, etc. So women would feel more confident, and also it would be a lot easier to take career breaks, re-enter the workplace.
Yeah, and I think this is a really big, what I love that you've brought in again, is this is when we talk about self-belief, and there's a huge piece that a lot of the kind of personal development world isn't talking about, which is like that systemic prejudice that we've, like, all marginalized groups of experience, and as women we've internalized that for centuries and centuries and centuries. So when I'm working with, we talk about the inner critic, you know, and the methods that they've internalized, it's not just what they've internalized from their parents, it's like it goes back for centuries. And there's so much interesting, there's my favorite book at the moment is The Authority Gap, which is just brilliant. There's like study after study of just proving that women are seen as less competent, that our competence is questioned not by men but also by women, unconsciously and consciously. So those feelings that when we go into a room that people are questioning our ability, it's not just in our head, it's not just our inner critic. Like, there is actually that assumption that because of our gender we will be less competent, and that is such a huge piece of that puzzle that has not been acknowledged in the kind of personal development field. And I think there's a cost to that, because it puts a huge emphasis on the individual that needs to fix themselves because they need to be more confident, and that's not fair.
I agree with that. I mean, at the time I got that Sheryl Sandberg book, you know, Lean In, and it was, I loved it, but looking back, it was very much the individual needs to do this, the individual needs to do that, the individual needs to get the seat at the table. Yeah, but actually, no, it's not about that. It's basically about making that table big enough and inviting people to come and sit with you and listen to them, and, you know, not just women but all of the minority groups as well. So
and I think I love the analogy about the table, because I've been thinking about that, but it's also like the people who are sitting at the table, they actually have to start thinking differently, because there's a really
looking around that table, is that table representative?
Exactly. So they can hear, there was an amazing study that I recently heard where essentially that when someone hears something from their tribe, what, you know, they will experience that as their own thoughts, so they will automatically agree with them. When they hear something from someone outside their tribe, whatever that tribe is, it will come across as an external thought, and there will be that disconnect. And so it made me realize that, you know, if you are not part of a tribe in whatever setting you are because of your gender, almost those people at the table cannot actually hear what you are saying in the same way as potentially the people they see as their tribe. And it was things like that got me just really, I guess I talk a lot about kind of that anger that you need. It's like that anger of like, we do really have to start looking at these things, because like you say, it's not just us leaning into the table. Because if we're leaning in and talking and people are not hearing what we're saying, then we are literally talking into thin air.
And also, if we've just pulled a seat up to the table, I have done this in the past, actually, gone to bigger meetings, just invite myself along, but the whole time in those meetings I felt like a real imposter. So it is that, isn't it? It's about welcoming people and making that table bigger, and yeah.
Yeah, and I love what you said about that table bigger. And that responsibility, like we're all a collective responsibility. When we talk about anti-racism work, anti-sexism work, it's not just mothers, it's not just women who need to do this. Like we really need to get our male allies, even the ones who want to be allies and the ones who don't. Like you say, it really is about creating that environment where everyone's responsible for it, because we cannot. Feminism's done so well, but I think the wall we hit is that we have not got the whole boat is not on board. It's like half the boat's over here trying to push this agenda, and the other half are not pushing this agenda, and it's not going to work until they jump on board with us.
Absolutely. So you help obviously individuals become more confident. We've talked a little bit about what society can do, what workplaces can do, but sort of moving on from that, one of my questions here is, what role does the brain and mindfulness play in our own individual success?
Right, because absolutely right. There's this dance between like social and systemic oppression, but we internalize that. So now we're going to what we can do. So there's so much really fascinating research that's happening right now that really confirms what coaches and psychologists and psychotherapists have known kind of a long time instinctively, and what they've observed really about the brain and its potential for change. For a long time, there was a sense that there was a static brain, that there wasn't much, we really couldn't change that much, that we were kind of fixed. And so what's really fascinating is there's really great research happening around kind of actually how the brain processes information. So there's a great neuroscientist called Lisa Feldman who's really leading a change in the way we see the brain. And so it's not, her argument is the brain is not really for thinking, it's just for regulating our energy. So if you imagine our brain is basically just a box in our head, it doesn't really know what's going on other than the information it gets from us. And then based on the information, it will make a prediction based on a previous experience. So essentially what we are doing is we are living our lives based on our past experiences. The benefit of this is that we can also create new experiences that then our brain almost has to pick from its repertoire, so that when it gets an input of this, so for example, you know, your boss walks into the room, your heart starts beating, the brain thinks, oh my gosh, her heart's beating, something's going to happen, I'm going to issue a prediction based on fear. Whereas actually, if you can create a new experience, your boss walks into the room, your heart doesn't start beating, the brain can then issue a different prediction because it's got new information to go on. And linked to that, that's also really exciting, is, you know, the relationship between our body and our brain, that people are really, again, this has been known by so many different modalities, but it takes neuroscience, I feel like, for people to really believe it, is that connection between our body. So, you know, that our brain really does respond to what's going on in our body, and it picks it up and it intensifies it. So the more that we can really calm ourselves, so that's why mindfulness is so important. It just essentially regulates our brain and tells our nervous system it's okay. So then our brain can relax and issue further information that helps us down whatever path we want to go on. So that's kind of the first thing about our brain that's really, really exciting, because it shows that there is...
You know, you can control it more than you think.
Yeah, absolutely. You can just start giving it other things to play on. Once we understand the process of how it works, we're like, okay, well, I know that in this situation, this is the response that normally happens, that my brain's expecting. So I can start just adapting how I respond, and absolutely adapting your bodily response. So, you know, before this talk, I could have been nervous, but I did my mindfulness practice. So then, you know, I regulated my body to the point that I was like, oh, I'm having a nice chat. You know, managed. My brain was like, well, actually, she's not freaking out. She's not running around at the last minute because she hadn't organized herself. She's sitting here ready, waiting. So that must mean what she's doing is not a high stress experience, because she's not doing the things she normally does before doing something that she's stressed by. Because I've learned from experience that doesn't work. So the other really exciting thing is just around, and this is not particularly new, about kind of our neuroplasticity, but it's just what's exciting is it's kind of gaining traction amongst different groups in society. So this is really the idea that we're not fixed. So our brain is a network of neural pathways, and that's how everything works. And these pathways are not fixed. So what we can have is we can learn new things as adults, not like children. So with children, they will learn something in like 3 weeks. because they have like their brain's very, very plastic, and they can very quickly create neural pathways. And so the thing with neural pathways is, if you imagine a big dense jungle when we're born, and it's each pathway has to really be cut down, you have to like trample it down. It's really, really hard work. And that's why you can see children work hard, like learning to walk takes forever, because they're creating those neural pathways. Actually, even in the womb, it's amazing. I've learned, they're already moving their body, creating those neural pathways. And it's the same for us with anything we do. When we learn to drive, we create new neural pathways. When we learn a language, we learn neural pathways. But also when we learned to understand the world, we did that with neural pathways, by creating neural pathways. And when we relate to others, we do that through creating neural pathways. So when we looked at a friend, we understood that we smile at them and we wave at them, because that's what we'd kind of created over time. And so what's really exciting about this is that there's loads of neural pathways that we don't use, but we could use. So at the moment, we often have quite automatic behaviours, they're called. So automatic.
I'm just thinking, so we might have learned neural pathways that maybe aren't serving us very well because of the environment we've grown up in. Can we unlearn those?
Perfect, thank you. That's such good. Absolutely. So this is this thing which comes really nicely to, we'll talk about the inner critic. Absolutely. So we kind of zoom back a little bit. As small children, we just have this core of just, we've seen our children, we're all parents. I imagine everyone watching here is parents. Like there's that innocence and joy and just delight. Like they're not expecting judgment, they're not expecting rejection, they're not expecting failure. So they take action based on those assumptions. But over time, we start expecting judgment, we start expecting failure. And so we take action to avoid those things, because inevitably we experience that. As we grow, we'll see our children, they'll develop, they'll have a knock to their confidence, and they'll think, okay, well, that really, really hurt me when my friend said that, or my mum, looked a bit displeased when I said that, or my teacher got cross. And that hurts so much, because we're hardwired to belong. As humans, the biggest fear is just rejection. So we will do everything to belong and to be loved, and to avoid that real pain of like, oh, I've done something wrong, I am wrong. So we will just take on these feelings, and we'll make them stronger. So if we say, oh, actually, my mummy didn't seem to like it when I said that, I'm going to internalize that voice and make sure that I never do that, to avoid that pain. But it's almost like we almost become our own worst enemy, our own prison guard, because we keep ourselves kind of locked in, and that just becomes automatic. Something happens and we are so automatically used to thinking this thought, which is, oh well, I must be to blame, so I'll just take down that avenue. And what's really exciting about so much research around neuroplasticity is that actually we can literally decide to go down another pathway, another thought, another neural pathway. And at first it's really hard, which is why all this work is a practice. Like it takes practice, but it also needs to have a framework around it where you really do believe in it and trust in it and kind of keep going with it. Because the first time you decide to follow, so I'll share like an inner critic calming practice, it's really clunky. It feels like you're learning to walk again, or like you're learning to drive a car again. And so what you are literally doing is you are finding that pathway that is covered in jungle, and you are having to cut that down. But the benefit is each time you make a decision to pause before a thought or an action, you're allowing your brain to choose which path to go down. And the more you go down that new neural pathway, kind of easier it gets. And then eventually it will become automatic. And then you can find a new challenge to set yourself and, cut down some more forests in your neural pathway.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Someone said here, so many great points, but how do we drive the change from inside? We've sort of just talked about that with our employers and beyond. So I suppose it's how do we get, I think she wrote this when we were talking about our previous point, how do we get our employers on board when we are trying to make these changes within the workplace ourselves as well?
So, well, I'll come to that point quickly. So I think really that the first thing is to really build in our trust with ourselves, to know that what we are asking for is really valid. So how we get them is to get them on board. And there's so many different avenues you can do to get your employers on board. But it's finding the thing that they're willing to listen to. So it's finding if they're genuinely interested in diversity and inclusion, then take that angle and get them on board with that. If business, if income and profit is generally their driver, just fair enough if that's what it is, then there's so much amazing research out there about how having greater diversity at board level, in fact, having 50% of representation of women at board level has a really significant impact on your bottom line. So there's loads of research that you can get around that as well. And so the first thing is getting your employers to actually engage with it and care, because so many people pay lip service to that. And then once they care, it's really about finding organizations who are going to be able to do some quite, I won't say over deep, but some quality work around diversity and inclusion. I think there's lots of tick box work that goes on out there that can do more harm than good. It can shame people, it can make them feel frustrated, it can make them feel like they're doing something wrong. So a lot of it is really around any anti-discrimination work you're doing is really about getting people to want to change, because we've talked about neural pathways, right? People who are unconsciously discriminating against any marginalized group are not doing it with awareness. It's an unconscious behavior. Yeah. And that takes time. So it's really about an organization who is really going to be willing to help their employees do it in the long haul, and it has to come from the top. Otherwise, it's going to end up being tokenistic. So there's no easy answer, I'm afraid. There's a multi-pronged approach, but if you get the right employer and you really get them to champion it, and if you're willing to become the holder for that, then there's really amazing work that loads of organizations are doing out there.
And this actually leads on to our next question. So how do you stay motivated when things aren't going to plan, when your career's not going to plan, when this conversation with your employer might not be going to plan, when your personal life's not going to plan? How do we stay motivated during those tough times?
Right. Exactly. And I think that's such a great question, because it's one of the most demotivating exercises in life is applying for jobs. It's designed to make us feel bad about ourselves. So the first thing really is to realize that fearing failure is the most basic human response. So coming back to my point that it's no reflection on you as a person if you are feeling self-doubt. That any situation that puts you at risk of failure will trigger fear of rejection. And ultimately, all we want is to be safe and to belong. Even though now we look at that, we're like, well, even if, it doesn't matter if my tribe don't want me anymore, I'm not going to starve. Our evolutionary brain hasn't caught up with us, that we still fear that. And often actually, the rejection, even the thought of what people think can be very, very powerful. So they don't even need to say anything sometimes, but even our fear that people might think wrongly of us
or judging
can be very, very powerful. And so that leads me on to the second point around, how powerful this fear of rejection can be, which I think I'm kind of, before I get to the motivation bit, it's really kind of looking at how we get demotivated, is often actually just thinking about something that may lead to rejection will trigger the same feelings as that rejection. So, even now,
do we need to experience the rejection to feel rejected?
Exactly, we don't, because we remember it. So going back, so if we all just take a moment now, if we think about something that we need to do, it's on our to-do list, we probably haven't been doing it for about 3 months. And if we think about that, my guess is that the reason we haven't done that is because we're fearing the outcome of what we do. And in our head, we've thought, well, it's already going to be a no, and then I'll just feel worse about myself. So why bother? Or it's going to make me feel so stressed. It's going to trigger those feelings of doubt. I'm not going to do it. And so just recognizing, how the thought of something is making us feel is really important. And And so then kind of going on to the motivation piece, the thing that has been most transformative around confidence, motivation, self-belief for my clients is actually firstly something I discovered through my own journey with coaching, and then just this hunger to want to learn, like, why is it that I don't have confidence? Like, I look at myself, I think there's no reason on paper that you have this view of yourself, because if you look at your past accomplishments, there's no reason. And yet I really had this really, really strong lack of confidence. And for me, this concept of the inner champion or inner power, whatever resonates with people, I don't mind what you call it, but there's an inner strength in all of us. And going back to what we talked about, how we create, how this inner joy, I suppose, what we see with our children, how over time it just gets overshadowed, it gets pushed to one side, it just almost gets crushed as we begin to internalize this oppression from years and like millennia of oppression, and also the oppression around us, that we start to internalize all these things, and we start to tell ourselves all the reasons why we're not enough, why we're not to stay safe. And so one of the most exciting things in my work is when I just really help people connect to that part of themselves, that inner champion, that inner core, that inner, I guess you could call it light, whatever, it's just that aliveness. And what happens when we can access that aliveness, it's almost like it creates a force field around us. And what's exciting, again, from a neuroscientific point of view, is we're actually accessing different parts of our brain. So when we're in this space of connection to our inner champion, our whole body changes. So our physiology changes, our heart rate changes, we're activating a different part of our brain. So that's our prefrontal cortex here. So we're much more creative, we're connected, we're really great at finding solutions. And it's just basically a wonderful way to be. And I don't understand why we don't teach our children inner champion work as well as literacy and numeracy. That's like a whole other thing, because actually it's not difficult. Doesn't take years of therapy, although I say there's a huge important role for that. Not to say that's not important. I'm a really great advocate of talking therapy, but it's that actually there are some tools that we can all use immediately that can really help us just connect to that feeling, even when we're feeling doubtful. Because it's, when life's great, it's really easy to feel great. So I feel great. But it's like when you feel down in the dumps, like how do you reconnect to that feeling?
Yeah, interesting. Sometimes it's just sort of shifting, isn't it? Thinking if you're having a bad time, or actually there is probably some truth in it, not to dismiss people, but there is some truth in, like, the count your blessings, go to bed, think about at least one thing that you've been grateful
Exactly. So all those practices, and I think what's interesting is there's so much great advice out there, but it's all quite disparate. And it was only when I kind of started thinking about the whole of looking at this inner champion and then kind of the other side of it, which is the inner critic, which is almost what dampens it, as I started seeing the connection with all the advice that you get. So absolutely, what you have is this inner core that needs to be nourished. So it needs to be nourished by like very simple habits. So like you said, those habits that we have that we dismiss because they're kind of boring. Like, it's boring to go to bed early, but it's so important. Like, if we want to nourish that part of ourselves, sleep is vital, because when we're talking about the inner critic, was that voice of doubt, it thrives on stress. It thrives on us being tired, right? And the champion thrives on when we're not tired, when we're refreshed and we're awake. So that's a huge one. Nutrition again, and this is the thing, and there'll be people I know in the past, when anyone mentioned nutrition, I'd be like, oh, not that again. But it's really, really important. Like, the more the work I do, like, these things are so fundamental, and we can go down a rabbit hole of doing all the kind of more exciting stuff and just forget the baseline. So when I talked about what I do with my clients, realizing it was about kind of this core of self-belief, and it wasn't almost about changing career, finding a job that we needed to do first. We really needed to kind of address that. It's really looking at the foundation, the magic simple things that really can be transformative. So sleep, diet, connection with friends. Like, this is one of the most nourishing things for our inner champion, like being with people who make us feel alive, who allow us to talk from that place. Often will be in a place where we're so surrounded by judgment that we have lost sight of that. So when we speak, we're speaking from a space of fear, not from that place of strength. So the connection's absolutely vital. And then like the fourth one really is just exercise. And I don't want to use the word exercise because that has so many negative connotations. It's just movement outside if you can. Again, all those things just really nourish your inner champion. And I think often one of my concerns with so much of the kind of one-off tips and hacks is like, yes, they work, absolutely. But the foundation has to be in place. You have to almost have, I always think of a well, you know, if you're trying to build a well, you need to have lots of water in there first. Otherwise, that all those lovely drops that you do with all those hacks, they're not going to fill that well. So it's really about having that foundation and then really having a practice.
Finding a tribe as well, I guess. Finding a like-minded. If your tribe isn't working for you, and you feel rejected or they're not recognizing you, then it's about finding, I suppose, like-minded.
Really finding those, and it's that thing, you know. And so a lot of the advice from coaching or even career change is actually really making sure that you find the people that you can be yourself with. And I mean your real self, like your authentic self, that often we don't even know who that is because we've spent so long trying to fit in with different people or trying to be this or that our inner critic is running the show most of the time. You know, that a lot of what we find ourselves getting involved is people pleasing. That's a huge inner critic tactic, I suppose, to gain love and affection. And quite often we might have really forgotten why we're, you know, what we're doing or who we're friends with or why we're relating to them, because we've got into this habit of wanting their reassurance. So absolutely, you know, finding that connection, moving, and just that basic thing, you know. And I think when we're job hunting in particular, or, you know, I think I was saying to my husband the other day of how coaching, being a professional coach and like job hunting, they're very similar. You're having to put yourself out there a lot. You know, I spend a lot of my time having to channel my inner champion because you are putting yourself out there and there's a huge fear of rejection constantly, having to really work on that. And the one thing that we often forget on the job hunting front is that it's a long time, it's a long game, and that we really have to nourish ourselves that whole way through, because when we are looking after children, we have demanding jobs, we are doing applications late at night because we don't have any other time. So it's eating into our sleep, which is making us more susceptible to kind of that inner critic, and we're not nourishing our inner champion. We're not eating because we're too busy. We often don't see our friends because we haven't got time anyway. But when we're job hunting, that goes secondary because we're spending every second we've got writing those job applications. So it's those basics really matter. So that's kind of the first, I'm gonna say the boring bit, but it's really important, is out of the way. Like, you know, if we want to connect our inner champion, those things have to be in place. Otherwise, we're just tinkering around the outside and we're just not really going to get the most out of it.
Yeah. And
then the second thing around the inner champion is kind of really around that inner critic management piece that we talked about, around staying motivated. And so I'm just going to very quickly just talk people through a couple of very, very simple exercises that you can do to calm your nervous system. And essentially what you'll start doing is the more you can do this when you feel yourself getting afraid, getting paralyzed, getting overwhelmed, even when you think about something, it's not even when you do something, it's actually the thought of something, because that for most of us, that's actually the biggest fear, is the thought of it. So then we put it off and then we are stressed and it all continues, is to create those new neural pathways. So I'd just like to take 1 second, just if you can imagine, so if you can do this as well, Elizabeth, just something that, like, very mild, on a scale of 1 to 10, we're thinking of 1. I don't want to like cause anyone to get an inner critic attack here because they're not nice. Just think about one thing that just makes you feel a bit like, oh, I don't want to do that, or oh gosh, I might fail. You got it in your head? Yeah? Okay. Yes. And then just allow that to be there. That's fine. Your inner critic's like, oh my gosh, there's a threat of danger. It pops up. Oh my God, we might fail. We might reject it. Great. It's doing its thing. You don't even need to engage with it right now because you can't. We're not in a space to engage. When we're in that inner critic space of fear, everything shuts down and basically your body goes into fight or flight mode, and it's not up for a conversation. It's basically short wired, that prefrontal cortex. It's not up for it. It's not having a chat. It's just going out there. It's either running out the door or it's freezing in the spot. So what we need to do is we just need to calm our system down first of all. And so there's wonderful tools that you can do. So anyone who does mindfulness, all the mindfulness tools are wonderful, because essentially what they do is they just allow ourselves to bring our nervous system back down and create a bit of space. So the first one that we'll just practice together to just practice exercise is just breathing in through your nostrils.
Yeah.
It's really gently, and you're not trying to do anything. You're not pushing that thought away. You're not trying to conjure up your inner champion. You're not fighting. You're just breathing. That's great. And then once you've created a little bit of distance, you just vocalize out loud what's happening. So, oh, my inner critic's telling me I'm going to fail if I send that email, not to bother. And what happens is, if you can vocalize that out loud, even just talking is very calming for your system. But even if you can't, what you're doing is you're creating space between the thought and yourself. And once you can see it as one thought, you realize it's not the only thought. So it creates distance. So you have calmed your nervous system. You've identified as your inner critic saying that. It's not the world. It's not the truth. It's not you. It's your inner critic. And then you can just go back and really start resetting. So from there's a lovely exercise called 3-3-3, where you essentially find 3 things in your environment to just look at, and then you call them out. So again, this is activating another part of our brain. So I can just see, as we're talking, I can see some curtains, I can see a tree, I can see a picture on the wall. And then after that, you just try and identify 3 sounds you can hear. So that might be a bit trickier if you're in a room, but if you all can, just try and close your eyes. See what sounds you can pick up. I can hear some people talking, and my stomach just rumbled. And I can hear some creaking on the stairs. And then the last one is just touch 3 parts of your body.
Okay.
So that is. And so what that does is it just calms your nervous system. So talking out loud and identifying different things shifts our awareness. Yeah. When we listen, we're using another sense, and when we touch our body, it's just incredibly calming. It's like a hug, basically. Yeah. So what you've done there is you've just reconnected to a different part of your brain, and then it's from here that you have a choice. And this is where the fun bit gets to, because essentially building up your inner champion is like going to the gym. Like right now, it's there, but she's probably not as strong as she once was. Like she's probably been neglected. She's probably there, but she's probably tired and maybe a bit frail. So she needs to go out. She needs a chance to go out and shine, and she needs to show you what she's capable of. So you need to act in line with how she would act. And the thing with confidence is, I think people often think, well, I'll be confident and then I'll do the thing. And actually, I'm sorry to say it's the other way around. As annoying it is, I wish it wasn't. We have to act first, and then the confidence will come, because what we need to show ourselves is that it's safe. We need to show ourselves that actually, remember that time you did that thing and you didn't fall flat on your face and you weren't rejected? Well, we can do it again. And so that's the first thing, is once we've managed to calm ourselves down, we have to take some action. And it can be the smallest thing. It can be whatever the opposite of what your inner critic wants you to do. So if your inner critic might want you to go away and hide and curl up, it's just stand up and move. If your inner critic doesn't want you to send that email, it's sending that email.
Yeah, press send.
So it's moving forward. And what it's sending the message to your body is actually, we are okay. I trust myself. And actually, I'm going to choose another action.
Brilliant. Oh, perfect. Thank you so much. So if people are watching this, where can they find you, to connect with you, to learn more about you and the services that Mother's Rock offers?
So there are multiple ways. Like everyone now, we are hyper connected. So I would say the first place is to go to my website, because that kind of tells you a lot about my philosophy and what I believe in, why I do what I do. You can also book a free chemistry call there if you're interested to do that as well. If you go onto my Instagram and my Facebook, there's also a free download that has loads and loads of other tips. I think there's about 7 or 8 tips that you can just download in a PDF that has just daily habits that you can practice every day that will really just strengthen that connection to your inner champion. And genuinely, in time, the things that seem so scary now will just become a habit. You'll find yourself just sending off those CVs. You'll find yourself picking up the phone and talking to people because it's just become a habit.
Yeah, I think it's so true what you say about how you have to do something to build your confidence. I do a workout sometimes if I have time. It's not a daily thing. You know, on YouTube with the lady, and she's like, you don't meant to have the energy to work out. You work out, and then you get the energy for the rest of the day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Similar
Yeah,
sort of thing.
yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know if anyone has any final questions for Violet. Just as we're wrapping up, feel free to put them in the comments, and I'm sure people can connect with you. I don't know, are you on LinkedIn? Or...
Oh yeah, I'm on LinkedIn as well.
Okay, lovely, perfect. So I'll tag you on LinkedIn. Yeah. If we've tagged you.
I'll also add the free download to LinkedIn.
Brilliant. All right, perfect. So thank you so much for today's session. I hope that everyone that's watched it has enjoyed it, has got a lot from it, and we'll put all the links so you can connect with Violet on the post as well. Thank you.